When your own father looks you in the eye and says, "Family first, pay your brother's college fees or you're out," something inside you shatters. It doesn't just sting, it rips open everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and home. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just packed that night, my hands shaking, stuffing clothes into a worn-out backpack while my heart screamed louder than my silence. But before I walked out of that door, I made sure to leave something behind. The next morning, chaos tore through my house. My aunt was crying like she had just lost someone. My uncle's voice thundered so loud the neighbors rushed to their porches. And my father, the man who once told me family meant sacrifice, was outside pleading with the very same neighbors he used to brag in front of. What they found inside the house that morning changed everything, and it all began with a car. My car. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Harper Lynn, I'm 19 years old, and until that night, I lived under a roof where love was measured in obedience and sacrifice. To most people, a car is just a car, metal, wheels, and an engine. But to me, my used blue Honda Civic was freedom. It was late-night drives with the windows rolled down, blasting music that drowned out the silence I lived in at home. It was the ability to escape, even if only for an hour, from a father who never once told me he was proud and a mother who looked at me with soft eyes but never raised her voice to defend me. I wasn't the golden child. That title belonged to my younger brother, Caleb. He's 17, sharp as a knife, and about to start college. My dad's pride and joy. Every time Caleb spoke, it was like the world stopped to listen. When I spoke, it was more like background noise. Caleb never missed a chance to remind me of my place either. "Nice car, Harper," he'd smirk. "Don't wreck it like you do everything else." He said it jokingly, but the sting lingered longer than he realized. My father, Elliot Lynn, was the kind of man who believed sacrifice meant bending until you broke. He grew up tough, worked construction, and carried his pride like armor. He always told us, family comes before anything else. But what he really meant was his definition of family, the version where Caleb's future mattered more than my independence. And then there was my mother, Marissa. Sweet, soft-spoken, and tired, always tired. She stood by silently as my father's words cut me open, like she wanted to speak but swallowed the words instead. I used to wonder if she was afraid of him or if she just believed, deep down, that he was right. Maybe both. That night at dinner, when Dad dropped the bomb, the air in the room turned heavy. "We sold your car," he said, his voice flat like he was announcing the weather. "The money's going to Caleb's tuition." I froze. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. My mother kept her eyes on her food. Caleb sat there, smug, like the king who just got his crown. "That was mine," I whispered. My throat felt tight, like speaking even those 3 words might make me break down. I worked for that. Every dollar, Dad didn't flinch. "Then work harder. Pay his fees or you're out of this house." Family first. The way he said it, so final, so casual, burned me alive. Family first. I wanted to scream that I was family too, that my dreams, my freedom, my dignity mattered. But his eyes had already dismissed me. In that moment, I understood exactly where I stood in this house. That's when the decision formed, sharp and clear in my chest. I wasn't going to fight him anymore. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to leave. But here's the part my father didn't see coming. I wasn't leaving silently. No, silence had been my prison for years. Before I walked out of that door, before I stepped into the night carrying only a backpack and a lifetime of disappointment, I made sure to plant a truth inside that house. A truth so undeniable, so powerful, it would crack their world open by morning. And when the sun rose, it wasn't just my absence they felt. It was the weight of everything I'd carried for years, finally left behind in a place they could no longer ignore. That morning, my aunt was sobbing, my uncle was raging, and my father, the man who thought he could strip me of everything, was begging. What they found that morning didn't just change their view of me, it changed everything they thought they knew about family, sacrifice, and the daughter they had pushed away. Before that night, before my father's ultimatum, I lived in a house where silence was louder than words. To anyone driving by, our home probably looked ordinary. white siding, a trimmed lawn, flower beds my mother tended to when she could find the energy. But inside those walls, everything was lopsided. Love, attention, expectations, it all tilted toward my younger brother, Caleb. I'm Harper Lynn, 19 years old. I wasn't the perfect daughter, but I wasn't a failure either. I worked 2 part-time jobs while taking community college classes. Every dollar I earned, I saved carefully. That's how I bought my used Honda Civic. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. It represented independence in a house where I always felt trapped. For me, that car wasn't just transportation. It was an escape hatch. On weekends, when my father's lectures about responsibility filled the air and my brother's laughter echoed through the halls, I'd grab my keys and leave. Windows down, music up. The world outside the windshield felt like mine for once. In those moments, I wasn't the overlooked daughter. I was Harper, the girl who had built something for herself. But my father, Elliot, never saw it that way. He wasn't a bad man in the way some fathers are. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't run off, but he believed in control, in the idea that love meant obedience. He had grown up poor, working his way up in construction, and he carried those scars with pride. His mantra was simple: family first. What he really meant, though, was Caleb first. Elliot saw Caleb as his legacy. Caleb was the son he bragged about at barbecues, the one he called our future. Caleb was everything I wasn't: male, ambitious, destined for college. I was the background character, the one expected to sacrifice so Caleb could shine. My mother, Marissa, was a shadow in her own life. She was gentle and soft-spoken, her love quiet but smothered by fear. I could see it in the way she folded laundry while my father spoke, nodding instead of speaking, swallowing her words before they could surface. She loved me. I knew that. But she loved peace more. And peace, in our house, meant silence. And then there was Caleb himself, 17, full of confidence, the kind that comes from never doubting your worth. He was smart, he really was, but he knew it too well. Every compliment from my father fed his pride. He had a smirk I'll never forget, the kind that made you feel small without him saying a word, and when he did speak, it was often to remind me of my place. Don't bother, Harper. Dad's right. You should be helping me, not wasting money on yourself. Your little car? Cute. Don't crash it before it rusts out. He thought he was joking, but jokes hit differently when the whole house laughs at you and you're the only one sitting in silence. Still, I tried to hold my head high. I poured myself into work. Early mornings at the diner, late nights stocking shelves at a store across town. I told myself if I saved enough, if I worked hard enough, I could build a life that was mine. The Civic was proof that I could accomplish something without my father's approval, without Caleb's shadow. But the balance in our house was fragile. Tension sat beneath the surface, ready to snap. I could feel it every time I came home late and saw my father standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "That car's a distraction," he would mutter. "You should be thinking about family, not yourself." He said it so often, the words stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like a warning. I wanted to believe my mother would protect me if things ever went too far. But the truth was, she was tired of battles she couldn't win. My Aunt Rose tried to be my quiet ally. She'd slip me cookies she baked or ask softly, "How's work, Harper?" But even she never stood up to Elliot, and my Uncle Victor was the kind of man who exploded first and thought later. When he visited, the house buzzed with his temper, and I knew better than to get caught in the crossfire. That was my world before everything collapsed, a house where my efforts were invisible, where my sacrifices went unnoticed, where my worth was measured only in what I could give up. My car was my rebellion, my small, stubborn proof that I could claim something for myself. I didn't know then that it would also become the weapon my father used to break me. I didn't know that the same set of keys that gave me freedom would also trigger the night I packed my bags. But I could feel it coming. Every tense dinner, every sidelong comment, every time Caleb laughed at my expense, it was building towards something sharp, something final. And when it came, when my father uttered those words at the dinner table, it wasn't just a family argument. It was the breaking point of years of silence, favoritism, and betrayal. The night it all snapped wasn't a stormy night or a night filled with yelling at first. It was just another Tuesday dinner at our worn oak table, with the usual clinking of silverware and the faint smell of garlic from the pasta Mom had made. But that night, the air carried a heaviness I didn't recognize until it was too late. When I walked in from my evening shift, the first thing I noticed was the driveway. Empty. My car, my Honda Civic, wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe Mom had borrowed it, or maybe Caleb had snuck out with it like he sometimes joked he would. But when I asked, the silence hit me harder than a punch. I sat down at the table, still in my work uniform, and asked, "Where's my car?" Dad didn't even look at me. He kept twirling pasta onto his fork like nothing had changed. Caleb smirked across the table, the corner of his lip pulling up like he was holding on to a secret. My stomach dropped. Finally, my father set down his fork, folded his hands, and said it like he was giving a weather report. "We sold your car." The words landed like a bomb. For a second, I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink. "What?" I managed to whisper. "We sold it," he repeated, voice steady, unbothered. "The money's going to Caleb's tuition. He starts college next fall, and it's not cheap. Family comes first, Harper. You'll understand." One day the room tilted. My throat went dry. That car was more than metal. It was my proof that I mattered, that my work wasn't invisible, and he had ripped it away in a single sentence. "That was mine," I said, louder this time, my voice breaking. "I worked for that car. Every dollar, every hour, I earned it." Dad's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, eyes cold. "Then work harder. You'll help pay for your brother's fees, or you'll pack your things and get out of this house. Family first, always." The silence that followed was unbearable. My fork lay untouched on my plate. Caleb shifted in his chair, trying not to grin. He couldn't hide the pride glowing in his eyes, like my loss was his victory. "You're serious," I said. My voice was trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so deep it scared me. Dad didn't hesitate. "I've never been more serious. Caleb has a future. He'll make something of himself. And you can either be part of that or you can leave." I turned to Mom, desperate for something, anything. Her hands were folded in her lap, her eyes glued to her plate. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at me. My chest tightened like I couldn't breathe. "Mom," I asked, my voice cracking, "say something." She finally looked up, her lips parting as if she might speak, but then she glanced at Dad and the words vanished. Her eyes were wet, but her silence cut deeper than Dad's command. Caleb chuckled under his breath, shaking his head like I was overreacting. "It's just a car, Harper. You'll get over it. I mean, come on. You don't really need it, not like I need school." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, throw my plate at the wall, do anything to make them feel the fire burning through me. But all I did was sit there, frozen in disbelief, while my father dismantled everything I had worked for, and my mother sat quietly complicit. That dinner stretched on like a nightmare. Dad went back to eating. Caleb scrolled through his phone like nothing had happened. Mom got up to refill the water pitcher, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. But inside me, something cracked, something permanent. It wasn't just about the car. It was about every time I'd been ignored, every sacrifice I'd made that no one saw, every achievement dismissed in favor of Caleb's next milestone. My father's words weren't just about tuition. They were about my place in this family, about how little I mattered. That night, I couldn't eat. I excused myself, went upstairs, and sat on my bed, staring at the keys that no longer unlocked anything. My car was gone. My freedom was gone. My family had chosen my brother's future over my independence, and they didn't even try to hide their satisfaction. I cried until I couldn't anymore. Then, as the house settled into sleep, I started packing, folding clothes into a backpack, shoving away the last traces of the girl who had tried so hard to belong in a house that never wanted her to. But as I zipped the bag shut, one thought burned brighter than my tears. I wasn't going to leave quietly. When I zipped my backpack shut that night, it wasn't just about leaving clothes behind. It was about leaving behind years of silence, years of being treated as less than. My father thought he had the last word at dinner, but the truth was he had just handed me the power I didn't know I had. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the moonlight pouring in through the window. My Civic was gone. My father's trust had never existed. My mother's voice was swallowed by fear, and my brother was probably sleeping peacefully in the comfort of his victory. My chest was heavy, my hands trembling, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Leaving wasn't the hardest decision. The hardest part was deciding what to leave behind, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be invisible. They would know exactly what I had been carrying, even if it was too late for them to appreciate it. I opened the drawer in my desk where I kept a stack of envelopes, receipts, pay stubs, bank slips, evidence of the life I had built in secret, evidence of sacrifices no one ever noticed, groceries I had paid for when my mother's card declined, utility bills I had slipped money toward when my father complained about how expensive the house had become. Even some of Caleb's early college prep fees, the books and online courses, had come from me. I gathered them all, stacking them neatly in one thick envelope. My hands moved fast, but my chest felt like it was caving in. Every slip of paper was a reminder of how much I had given without asking for recognition. I thought about the nights I had skipped meals to make my savings stretch, the shifts I had taken when I was sick, the miles I had driven in that car just to hold 2 jobs together, and all of it had gone unnoticed until tonight, when Dad stole the very thing I had built for myself. I grabbed a sheet of paper and began to write. My pen scratched furiously across the page, the words pouring out faster than my tears. Dad, you told me family comes first, but you never noticed that I've been putting this family first for years. The food in the fridge, the lights that stayed on, the books Caleb used to get ahead. That was me. I did that. I sacrificed while you turned away. You taught me that family means giving until you're empty, but I'm done being empty. This time, I'm choosing myself. When you find this, I'll be gone. Maybe then you'll finally see who I really was, not just the daughter you ignored, but the person who held this family together. By the time I finished, the page was smudged from my tears, but the words were clear, sharp, final. I folded the letter, slipped it into the envelope with the proof, and sealed it shut. My heart pounded as I walked quietly through the darkened house, the floorboards creaking under my bare feet. I could hear Caleb snoring in his room, the steady rhythm of someone who had never known what it felt like to lose. My parents' door was closed, the faint sound of Dad's snores rattling through. In the kitchen, I stood still for a moment, staring at the bread box on the counter. Mom used it every morning, reaching for it without thinking, the one ritual in this house that felt ordinary. That's where I placed the envelope, tucking it carefully inside, where I knew it would be found within hours. As I set it down, my chest felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but lighter. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was truth. I wanted them to know that the daughter they dismissed had been the backbone of their comfort. And when they discovered it, they wouldn't just feel my absence. They would feel the collapse of everything they had taken for granted. I turned, grabbed my backpack, and paused one last time at the doorway. The house was quiet, still, asleep in its ignorance. My mother's silence, my father's pride, my brother's arrogance, it all hung in the air like ghosts. I whispered into that silence, as much for me as for them. You wanted me gone. Fine. But you'll never forget me. I stepped out into the night. The cool air wrapped around me, stinging my skin, but also waking me up. For the first time, I wasn't running away to escape. I was leaving with purpose. As I walked down the street, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, I felt the ache of loss, but also the spark of freedom. I didn't know where I was going yet, maybe a friend's couch, maybe nowhere at all. But I knew one thing. By morning, the house I left behind would never be the same. The morning after I walked out, the house I left behind woke up to a storm, not a storm of thunder or rain, but of truth. I wasn't there when it happened, but I know exactly how it unfolded because my family was predictable. Their patterns burned into my memory. And later, neighbors would whisper about it, their voices carrying the shock like wildfire. It started with my mother, Marissa. She always rose before everyone else, shuffling into the kitchen in her slippers, her hair loose around her shoulders. She reached for the bread box like she did every morning, expecting nothing but the usual loaf of store-bought bread. Instead, her fingers brushed against the thick envelope I had tucked inside. She opened it, probably thinking it was a mistake. But when she slid out the stack of papers, the pay stubs, the bank slips, the receipts, her hands must have started to shake. My letter lay folded on top, my handwriting unmistakable. She read it once, twice, maybe 3 times, her lips trembling as the reality sank in. The daughter she had stayed silent for, the daughter she had watched be pushed aside, had been carrying the family in ways she'd never known. By the time my father, Elliot, walked into the kitchen, Mom's tears had already begun to fall. She clutched the letter like it was burning her hands. "What's going on?" he grumbled, rubbing his eyes. She thrust the envelope at him. "Read it." At first, he must have been dismissive, maybe even annoyed. But as his eyes scanned the words, as he flipped through the papers, the color drained from his face. My father, so proud, so unshakable, stood frozen, the truth slicing through his pride. That's when my aunt, Rose, came in. She saw my mother's tears and rushed to her side, pulling the letter away when Elliot refused to read it out loud. Rose's sobs filled the room as she realized what I had done for them all those months. And then came Uncle Victor. He stormed into the house like he always did, loud and impatient. But when Rose shoved the papers at him, his temper exploded in a way even my father couldn't contain. "You let her do all this?" Victor shouted, slamming the envelope onto the counter so hard that receipts fluttered to the floor. "You bled that girl dry while you sat on your throne bragging about Caleb? Are you insane, Elliot?" The neighbors heard his roar. They gathered outside, peeking through curtains, stepping onto porches. My father, so obsessed with appearances, so desperate to look like the strong provider, was suddenly exposed. Caleb wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, confused by the noise. He picked up a fallen receipt, scanned it, then frowned. "Wait, she paid for this? She paid for what?" His voice cracked, disbelief painted across his face. For once, the golden boy couldn't smile. He couldn't joke. He couldn't deny that the sister he mocked had been the one propping him up all along. My father tried to salvage it. "She misunderstood. She exaggerated," he stammered, waving the papers in the air like they were lies. But the more he spoke, the more the truth betrayed him. Each receipt was undeniable. Each pay stub bore my name. Each word in my letter was a mirror reflecting the hollow man he had become. When the neighbors pressed closer, Elliot did something I never thought I'd see. He stepped outside, letter crumpled in his fist, and begged. His voice cracked as he pleaded with them, desperate to control the story. "She doesn't understand. She's young. She twisted this." But no one believed him. Not when my mother stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, too broken to defend him. Not when Aunt Rose cried openly, telling anyone who would listen that I had been the one quietly feeding and protecting the family. The humiliation was unbearable for him. The man who valued respect above all else was left stripped of it, his pride in tatters before the very people he wanted to impress. Inside the house, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, staring at the evidence. His hands gripped the receipts until they crumpled, his lips pressed tight. For the first time, he saw me not as the sister in his shadow, but as the foundation of the life he had taken for granted. The climax wasn't loud because of me. I was already gone. The climax was loud because the truth I left behind finally screamed louder than I ever could. It filled the house with chaos. It spilled into the street. It turned my father's commands into empty air, my mother's silence into regret, my brother's smirk into guilt. And as I walked farther from that house, backpack heavy on my shoulders, I imagined every sound. Rose's sobs, Victor's shouts, my mother's wails, and my father's desperate pleas. The very man who told me family first was now watching his family fracture under the weight of the lies he had built. What they found inside that envelope wasn't just proof of my sacrifices. It was proof that I had always mattered, more than they ever admitted. And now, without me there, they had no choice but to face it. By the time the sun was high that morning, I was miles from the house I had once called home. My backpack dug into my shoulders, but the weight inside me felt lighter than it had in years. Behind me, the chaos I'd unleashed was still unraveling, and though I couldn't see it with my own eyes, I could feel it. I imagined my father pacing the living room, the papers still scattered across the table like evidence of a crime. His pride had always been his armor, but now it was cracked wide open, every receipt a nail in the coffin of his authority. The man who used to shout, "Family first," had been exposed as blind to the sacrifices his own daughter made, my mother. I pictured her sitting on the couch, the letter trembling in her hands. She would cry not just for me, but for herself too. For all the years she stayed silent, for every time she turned away when I needed her to speak up. I don't think she meant to betray me. She was just so used to shrinking, so used to surviving in the shadow of my father's rules. But silence is its own kind of betrayal. I think she finally realized that. And Caleb, my golden brother, wouldn't be laughing anymore. He'd be staring at those receipts, his stomach churning as the truth sank in. All those years he thought he was the center of our family's sacrifices, when in reality it was me keeping him afloat. He had mocked me, belittled me, acted like I was just the older sister in his shadow. Now he knew the truth. Without me, the very foundation of his success was cracked. The neighbors wouldn't forget either. They'd whisper about Elliot Lynn, the proud father who lost his daughter and his dignity in a single morning. He had spent years preaching about family, respect, and sacrifice, but when the curtain was pulled back, everyone saw who had really been making the sacrifices. And it wasn't him. But for me, the aftermath wasn't just about what they lost. It was about what I finally gained. For the first time, I was free. Free from the suffocating silence of my mother, free from the sharp edge of my father's voice, free from Caleb's shadow. I walked toward a future I couldn't see clearly yet, but it was mine. That alone was enough. Still, the ache was real. Leaving wasn't easy. As much as they hurt me, as much as they made me feel invisible, they were still my family. I thought about birthdays around that table, about Mom brushing my hair when I was little, about Dad teaching me how to ride a bike before he turned cold and demanding. Love and pain were tangled together so tightly it was impossible to separate them. But sometimes, loving yourself means stepping away from the people who refuse to see your worth. As I sat on a bus later that day, the city rolling by outside the window, I pressed my forehead against the glass and thought about the lesson I wanted to hold on to. My father believed family meant sacrifice at any cost, but I finally understood something different. Family is supposed to lift you up, not strip you down. Family is supposed to protect you, not exploit you. And when they fail to do that, you have the responsibility to walk away. That night, in a cheap motel room with nothing but my backpack and my thoughts, I opened my wallet. Tucked inside was a faded photo of me and my mom from years ago, before the weight of silence bent her shoulders. I stared at it for a long time, my chest heavy. Maybe one day she'd find the courage to step out of her silence. Maybe one day Caleb would grow into a man who understood gratitude instead of entitlement. Maybe one day even my father would look at those receipts and finally admit what he had done. But I knew better than to wait for that day. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave, not out of spite, not out of hatred, but because you deserve more than being invisible in your own life. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew who I was. Harper Lynn, the girl who had carried a family that never carried her back, the girl who finally laid down her burden and walked away. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't let anyone convince you that sacrifice means losing yourself. Don't let family first mean you last. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. And when you do, you'll discover strength you never knew you had. And that's what I left behind in that house. Not just proof of my sacrifices, but the undeniable truth that I mattered. They might never admit it out loud, but deep down, I know they'll never forget it. So that's my story. I walked away from a house where love was conditional, where sacrifice was demanded but never returned. And in leaving, I learned the hardest, most important lesson of my life. Sometimes, family isn't who you're born to. It's who values you, who sees you, and who lets you be more than a shadow. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, I hope my story reminds you that your worth is not defined by how much you give up for others. Your worth is yours, and no one, not even the people who should love you most, gets to take that away. Thank you for listening to this journey with me. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings in the comments. I read every single one, and your voices matter here. And if you want more stories like this, raw, emotional, and real, make sure you give this video a like. It only takes a second, but it helps so much in reaching more people who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss when I share something new. Every story has the power to change someone's perspective, maybe even their life. And together, we can build a space where voices like mine, like yours, are finally heard. So, like, comment, share, and subscribe. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself.